Today we're reading a Gary Paulson book, and it's published by Scholastic. So thank you to both of them for allowing us to do that and share this with you. And I'm going to break it up so that you don't have to sit through one whole chapter book read aloud. That would be a long time. So for this one, it has 8 chapters, and this book is called Masters of Disaster. And there are 8 chapters, so I'm going to read 2 chapters at a time. So this recording will have chapters 1 and 2. And then you can play the next video another time when you're ready, or you can go ahead and keep playing the next one and read the whole chapter book with me. It is a very funny book. So it's called Masters of Disaster. And I am outside on my porch reading, guys, so you might hear dog barking or a car beep or something, but we're going to ignore it. So I'm also in my pajamas, and that's okay. So I hope you guys are curled up somewhere comfortable and ready to listen. All right, chapter 1 is called The Launch of a Grand Plan. This book does not have any pictures, so there's nothing for me to show you as I'm reading, all right? I've called you here today, men, because I have an important announcement, one that will change our lives. Henry Moseley licked his finger and carefully flipped a page of densely scribbled notes on the yellow legal pad in front of him. He cleared his throat, looked up, and made eye contact with his audience. Henry's audience was small, just Reed Hamner and Riley Dolan, his best friends, and they were sitting at his kitchen table after school, but still, he knew that every good public speaker, not to mention every effective leader, understood the significance of looking a man in the eye. Henry Moseley was 12 years old. He'd recently watched a documentary about General Douglas MacArthur with his grandfather, an Army veteran, during which he'd been very impressed with military precision and choosing words carefully, not to mention examples of bravery and inventiveness. Excuse me. Earlier at school, Henry had told Reed and Riley that he needed to speak with them regarding a subject of the utmost importance, and that they should meet at his house at precisely 1600 hours. Reed had been late, of course, because it took him a while to figure out what 1600 hours was, and he was always late because he got lost a lot, even though he only lived 3 streets over. Riley had not only been on time, but he had also brought granola bars and Ziploc bags of fresh vegetables and bottles of water for all 3 of them, because he knew that meetings required snacks, and Riley was always prepared. Always. I am proposing, Henry continued, reading carefully from his notes, that we undertake and implement a series of daring experiences and grand adventures the likes of which the history of Western civilization has never seen. At least not from 12-year-olds in suburban Cleveland. Reed scratched his ear and looked confused. Reed frequently looked confused. Riley snapped a carrot stick in half and looked thoughtful, his usual expression. Why? Reed finally asked, a hint of panic in his voice. Why are we under what sitting and implement who's sitting? Henry's got spring fever, Riley explained somewhat dismissively, Henry thought. What I have in mind is so much bigger than that, Henry said. I'm working to create a series of tasks that will prove our manhood and show us what we're made of. And if we play our cards right, we just might alter the course of history a time or two. And, of course, impress girls and get them to notice us. What made you start thinking about things like experiences and adventures and bravery and what we're made of? Reed was chewing a fingernail and looking as if he had to go to the bathroom. Urgently. English class. What happened during 5th period? Riley asked. And what got you talking so official-like and, I don't know, epic? Henry had a way of always sounding like whatever he was currently reading or watching, and Riley racked his brains to remember whether their reading list lately had included any books about military history or Greek mythology. Remember how we read Huckleberry Finn and Treasure Island, and the book about how the kids tried to save their father from the space-time continuum thingy, and that other book about the boy who got stuck in the woods after a plane crash? I got to thinking, what would our stories be like? What would an author write about us? Let's face facts. We may be the most boring 12-year-olds on the planet. We're not boring, Henry, Reed said in a small voice. Really? Because I've been thinking about our lives lately, and perfect attendance does not count as exciting. Well, we don't just go to school. We also, there's, and then of course, Reed looked to Riley for help, but Riley just shrugged. Exactly, Henry said. Nothing interesting ever happens. Luckily, I have plenty of ideas. What kind of ideas? You leave the details to me. Henry patted his legal pad confidently. Does that mean you're in charge, like the boss or something? Reed always cared about who was in charge. He was the only boy in his family. He had 3 older sisters and 3 younger sisters, and he never got his way at home. Never. Not ever. Of course not. This is a democracy. We vote on everything. Well, then I vote no. I don't want to complain or worry anyone, but adventures sound dangerous, and I have a curfew. I don't have time to change history if I have to be in the house by 8 o'clock on weekdays, or whatever the new way of saying 8 o'clock is. The voting starts later when I tell you each plan. The idea to go ahead with becoming men of action and daring, masters of adventure. Well, I've already made that executive decision for all of us. Like I said, my curfew is 8 on school nights, and that's only if I've gotten my homework done. And doesn't daring usually mean painful? I don't like pain. There might be some pain, Henry allowed, but not much. Probably. I mean, hardly any. I mean, maybe a little, but no blood. Definitely no blood. I mean, well, okay, maybe a smidge, but not enough to worry about. To Reed, Henry sounded as if he'd be disappointed if there weren't pain and blood. What do you think? Reed looked at Riley, who'd been taking notes. Riley's mother was a reporter, and his father was a court stenographer, so Reed and Henry were used to seeing Riley quietly scribbling in a notebook, not only in class, but during routine conversations. Riley's attention to detail had resolved more than a few arguments over the years when they went back and consulted his jottings. He wasn't a big talker like Henry, and he wasn't a nervous babbler like Reed. He took notes. I want to see what happens, Riley said now, looking up from his notebook. I'm in. See, even without a formal vote, majority rules, Henry said, smiling. Reed put his head between his knees and tried to breathe slowly because he heard that this technique made your heart stop racing and helped the swirly blobs in front of your eyes go away. The upside-down position only made his ears ring more loudly. I'm going to tweak the ideas for a few more days, Henry said to the top of Reed's head, and we'll reconvene this weekend and get started. Reconvene? Reed asked. You mean meet up? Don't worry, Reed, Riley said. I know a website where you can draw up your last will and testament. Although he was only 12, Riley had already written several drafts of his own will. He liked to be prepared. See how interesting things have gotten already, Henry asked. Did you think when you got up in the morning that you'd be writing a will in the afternoon? My plan is revving things up around here. I'm not sure I'm the kind of person who was meant for an interesting life, Reed said, raising his head. I think my inner courageous guy might be hibernating, or non-existent. That's exactly why we need to start doing interesting things that will build our character, Henry said. Otherwise, we could wind up like Dwight Hauser. Reed and Riley both frowned. At their school, Dwight Hauser was just another way of saying stuck-up pushy jerk, puke-spewing slime ball, or nose-picking booger-eating punk. Dwight Hauser was an out-and-out bully, but Henry, Riley, and Reed knew that he was yellow clear through because he only picked on girls or younger kids. Yellow means cowardly. Hauser was always surrounded by rumor-spreading group of tiny-minded toadies who'd been scheming for years to slip iguana poop into the beef stew in the lunchroom. Well, if you put it like that, Reed said, I'll keep you guys company. If you insist. Well, if you put it like that, Reed said. Oh, I just said that. You wait and see, Henry said. You're going to wind up thanking me for coming up with this plan of action. I have a feeling, men, that it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to us. Chapter 2, Breaking the Record. I have it, the absolutely perfect first idea. Henry held up a yellow legal pad covered with calculations. He was sitting next to Reed and Riley on his back steps the following Saturday morning. They'd met at 0900 hours, which wasn't too tricky for Reed to figure out, but he was still late because he'd overslept, and then he'd taken a right when he meant to take a left at the Petersons' house on the corner because Erica Peterson was getting in the car to go figure skating lessons, and Reed thought Erica was so pretty he had a hard time telling right from left when he saw her. Riley, of course, had been early and had brought a 3-ring binder full of loose-leaf paper, a small digital voice recorder with extra batteries, a new box of mechanical pencils, and a morning snack of 3 oranges because he believed in being prepared for any eventuality. Always. Perfect idea for what? Reed's voice was shaking, and he wiped his sweaty hands on his jeans. Our first adventure. Men, we're ready to begin. You sound so sure, but how do you know? Reed's voice cracked. I'm not at all sure we're anywhere near ready. I mean, ready is such a big word. Maybe you should tell us what we're thinking about first, and then we can talk about it for a while. A really long while. Because it might take us a long time to get ready, if we ever are. Henry waved the legal pad, which was covered with sketches and formulas and diagrams and notes and printouts from web articles as if he were swatting away Reed's worries like flies. We have to do something that breaks a record. He paused dramatically. Henry jotted a few more notes while Reed stared off into space, thinking of how much he loved his family, even his third littlest sister, and how much he would miss them, when one of Henry's record-breaking plans got him killed. Because breaking records went hand in hand with the possibility of death. No one ever broke records by sitting quietly or petting the cat. Breaking records usually had to do with speed, and sometimes sharp objects or explosive devices, and paramedics standing by with a defibrillator and fire extinguishers. Riley pondered Henry's announcement. Do you mean a city record, or county, or state? Henry shook his head. World record. Otherwise, nobody will pay any attention. Of course. Riley underlined world in his notes. I've given it a lot of thought. Henry flipped to the second page of his legal pad. The hardest part was deciding just what record to break or make, since some of the ones I thought about have never been done before. There's no current world record for kids staying alive underwater. Weird, huh? And I was bummed to find out that there's, what's it called? He consulted his pad. An ethics regulation against getting a white rat dunk and then teaching him to drunk and then teaching him to drive a model car in order to do a study of drunk driving. Something about cruelty to animals. Even though I'd have put a tiny little seatbelt on the rat. And my research about making a capsule and riding in an oil pipeline from one pumping station to the next, to see what it's like to be oil, that didn't work out. Everyone I called hung up on me. Living underwater, driving rats, oil? Reed muttered numbly as he watched Riley list the possible records in neat columns. Since this is our first try, Henry continued, I figure we need to start with resources we can easily find and a situation that's at least kind of familiar. The perfect solution, obviously, is bikes. And he jumped up to face them. We're going to break the world record for the most forward airborne somersaults on a bike. Silence. Exactly, Henry said. It's perfect. I knew you'd agree. At last, Reed said, I've watched those extreme bike competitions on TV. Those guys are amazing, doing backflips and twists and off-the-bike somersaults. 2, sometimes 2.5, or even 3 complete rolls with a full doppelganger and a whiz-banger, or whatever they call them. What's so special and record-breaking about forward somersaults? Well, here's how I see it, Henry said. Nobody, especially not a guy our age, has ever done one forward somersault, blindfolded, with their hands tied together, and then to the handlebars. I'm sure it's never been done. So even if we get 1, we've got the record. And if we get 4, well, that's just the most awesome thing ever. Riley looked up from his notes. Henry, somebody will have to get pretty high to make 4 somersaults with a bicycle tied to his hands. 47 feet, Henry said. I worked it out with a calculator. Oh, well, if it's just that, Reed said. I thought it was going to be hard. He started laughing, then stopped when Henry and Riley didn't join in. Wait, you guys aren't seriously considering that, are you? Henry went on. The hard part's going to be when you who? Who's you? Reed sounded like an owl. Who? Who is this, you mean? Well, obviously I'd like to, but I was the one who came up with the idea, and I've done all the calculations, and I'll be point man during the jump. Busy measuring and organizing and double-checking every safety detail, so it can't be me. Reed turned hopefully to Riley, who pointed to his notebook. My talents are best suited to recording the event for posterity. Posterity, Reed said with a resigned sigh. Sounds like a fancy way of saying watching Reed get his butt kicked and his guts hung up on the tree limbs approximately 47 feet off the ground. Maybe, Riley said. It depends on luck. Nah, Henry said. Look at it this way. You were the least jazzed about the whole thing, so it'll be that much more amazing if you're the one to do it on the first adventure. Plus, it'll be your name in the record books because you'll be the record breaker, the one everyone remembers. Oh, well, when you put it that way, Reed didn't sound convinced. Henry rubbed his hands together. Good, let's get going. Wasting daylight. Today? Why so suddenly? Reed's right eye twitched and his teeth chattered. Henry and Riley looked at each other. They ignored Reed's panic attack. They pulled him to his feet and started walking to his house to pick up his bicycle. Henry dragged a red wagon loaded with boxes as he debated with Riley about angles and height differentials and the virtue of measurements in feet versus meters. Reed staggered along in a fog of terror. Henry said, I know the perfect place to do this. Reed went into his garage and got his bike. The Batsons' house. Henry nodded. They're away on vacation, and my sister Lauren is feeding their guinea pigs and watering the plants. I borrowed their house key so we can get into the attic. They have a steeply pitched roof, which makes for the perfect angle sloping down to the backyard. He started toward the Batsons. Roof? Reed hadn't quite caught up. You want me to ride off a roof? And if you can see in the cover of the book is that kind of the picture of that roof there. Of course, the distance from the roof to the ground will allow for the number of rotations we require, and we can't underestimate the value of privacy. No one will disturb us or rip off our idea. Plus, and this is key, the Batsons are the only family in town with a Hydro 3000 super reinforced spring-loaded cover on their swimming pool. Why does that matter? Reed's teeth started chattering again. For altitude, in case you miss the diving board, and of course as a safety net after you complete the stunt, Henry said, shaking his head. Isn't that obvious? The additional bounce from the springs should assist you to do the additional forward somersaults in midair before you come to rest. Who knows? You might even get 6 or 7. Is that legal? Riley asked. I'm pretty sure records are only valid if you follow all the rules. Otherwise, the whole thing could wind up being for nothing. I looked up the regulations on the Extreme Bike website, and there's nothing about springboards being prohibited. You just can't use a motor, which was good to know, even though it ruined my plan to attach an old Corvette engine to the bike and add speed to the equation. You want me to drive off the roof of a house and bounce on a diving board with a bicycle? Reed had stopped walking. That's what you're after here. Of course, Henry said, because just riding off the roof would be stupid. You start at the highest point of the roof, shoot down the incline, touch and go on the diving board, and do the flips over the pool so that you eventually land on the cover, which is top of the line and has the necessary, he glanced down at his legal pad, tensile strength to support your weight. Riley looked up from his own set of notes. Do the Batsons know we're diving off their roof, bouncing a kid and a bike on their diving board and landing on their pool cover? Henry shrugged. Not really. I thought it best to keep our plans private. Good thinking. Wait a minute. Reed shook his head as Henry's idea continued to slowly sink in. Are we absolutely positive that driving a bike off a roof is the best way to break a record? Yep, off that roof. Henry pointed at the Batsons' house and nodded approvingly. The house was 3 stories high, with a sharply peaked roof, and reminded Reed of a castle. An ugly old castle where bad things happen to boys who let themselves get talked into doing stupid things just to get their stupid name in a stupid record book. Henry pulled the key out of his pocket and led Reed and Riley to the back door. Reed's knees were trembling so hard that Henry and Riley had to carry his bike up the stairs while he remained glued to the kitchen floor. They left the bike near the window in the attic and jogged back downstairs to pry Reed's hands off the back door. While Henry pushed and Riley pulled the rigid Reed up the stairs, Henry chatted encouragingly to Reed. Come on, open your eyes. Just one more flight. You can do this. Let go of the railing. Look, almost there. It's going to be a piece of cake. You'll see. I can't feel my arm because you're cutting off the circulation. It'll be over so fast you'll want to do it again. Trust me, buddy. Took some convincing to keep Reed moving, but there was no need to use a tranquilizer gun and throw him over their shoulders, even though Henry had that option in his plans just in case. They finally got Reed up to the Batsons' roof and shoved him out the window. Riley stood next to him, holding a handful of Reed's shirt so he wouldn't make a run for it or fall, while Henry ran downstairs and carried the boxes from the red wagon upstairs. Reed refused to open his eyes, much less help, so Henry and Riley had to dress him. Henry had raided his garage of every piece of athletic protection his father, a PE instructor, had collected over the years. They forced the football pads over Henry's head and tied the laces snug across his chest. Henry wedged a mouth guard between Reed's clenched teeth as Riley strapped soccer shin pads on Reed's lower legs. They threw a quick game of scissors, paper, rock. That's weird. I usually hear it's rock, paper, scissors, to figure out who had to shove the cup down the front of Reed's football pants. After Henry and Riley had dressed Reed in all the protective gear they had, they sat him on his bike, slapped a hockey goalie's helmet on, and adjusted the band on the goggles. Reed started to scream when Henry tied the bandana around his eyes, so sadly they decided against adding the blindfold to the stunt. It was okay, though, Henry figured, because Reed had his eyes shut tight. Riley, who had a first aid kit poking out of his backpack because he believed in always being prepared. That guy was loud. He believed in always being prepared, began wrapping Reed's hands to the handlebars with an ace bandage. Let's do this, Henry slapped Reed's back. No, I really don't want to. You know, all things considered, it's a whole lot of altitude. Reed, Riley said, you're forgetting it will be your name in the record book. You're the one who will be famous. You're the one who will have all the girls thinking you're really cool. Well, when you put it that way. But still, it's a heck of a long way down, and I think... Go! Henry shoved Reed from behind. The bike tottered from the impact, and for a second Henry thought Reed would skid down the roof on his side, thereby ruining the entire project. But Reed's instincts for self-preservation kicked in. He regained his balance and righted the bike as momentum took over, and he began hurtling down the roof. Riley noted the time and wrote it down. At the instant Reed hit the bottom edge of the roof, he was moving at something approaching terminal velocity, which Henry had researched and discovered was about 120 miles an hour for a falling body. The bearings on the bike were nearly smoking. At this point, Henry was glad he'd abandoned the idea of shaving Reed's head and greasing it with petroleum jelly to reduce friction. It probably wouldn't have increased the speed much, and Reed would have objected more. Henry glanced down at his list and made an X through Vaseline on bald head. Reed flew off the roof and seemed to hover in midair for an astonishingly long time, even though Riley only counted to 2 Mississippi in his head. Reed's eyes were still screwed shut, so he didn't see Henry grinning and flashing him a thumbs up, or Riley, who was wishing he'd brought his video camera. No! Reed howled as he dropped out of sight. 5 Mississippis later, as Henry and Riley were scrambling to the edge of the roof to look down over the yard, Reed reappeared in front of them, much higher than the edge of the roof. Amazingly, Reed had hit the diving board perfectly in the center, and the force of the impact had snap-propelled him and the bike back up in the air. About, Riley wrote later in his project summary, like someone flicking a booger off a finger. Reed dropped like a stone before Henry and Riley could say anything, and they saw him plummet toward the ground for the second time. This time they heard the scream as he dropped, "Call 911!" Although the first landing was picture perfect, on the next bounce, Reed was leaning slightly to his left, and the bike shot out sideways due to the force and angle of the impact. He'd have fallen off the bike if not for the ace bandage binding him to the handlebars. The bike skidded on the diving board and ricocheted off at a 45-degree angle, aiming Reed at the back alley. The speed was more than Henry had ever hoped for. Reed flew headfirst into a collection of plastic garbage cans, dragging the bike behind him, crashing through 2 trash bags full of used disposable diapers, which didn't slow him down at all. Reed seemed to pick up speed as he hit almost everything else along the side of the Batson's alley for the next half block. He hammered 2 more garbage cans, avoiding mowing down Mrs. Hooperman's cockapoo by a good 4.5 inches, and after a carom of the Klein's garage, exploded into a classic parabolic projectile curve, during which he did 1 full and complete perfect forward somersault, before coming to rest sitting against a rusted-out Chevy half-ton truck, a disposable diaper covering his head and face. In a voice muffled by the diaper and its contents, most of which was oozing down his neck, he called out to Henry and Riley. Man, that would have been so bad without a helmet. You know, Riley, I don't think the extreme bike people are going to acknowledge the record without objective witnesses or some kind of photograph or video proof, Henry said as they climbed back up the roof to the window. Video! I should have thought of that before Reed took off on the bike. Plus, we'd have to be able to prove the actual height Reed achieved, even though I'm dead certain it was way over 47 feet I estimated. Don't feel bad, Henry, Riley said. Look at this as a test run for future events. Now we know we need cameras to document and authenticate what we do. But I bet we can get the plans for the house at the county assessor's office and determine the exact height of the roof anyway. I think, Henry mused aloud as they headed down the stairs and out the back door, that given the height of the first bounce, and even allowing for the fact that the back tire slipped the second time, torquing the landing, and despite the fact that we can't prove we broke a record, the project was a complete success. Yep, Riley answered as he cut the ace bandage and released Reed from the bike. They pulled Reed away from the scattered garbage. Amazing, man, you were brilliant, Henry said. Bad break to have nailed those diapers, buddy, Riley said to Reed. Then he turned to Henry. I'm going to need your plans, Henry, for my report. Sure thing, Henry nodded. Let's hose Reed off. I forgot that the Batsons have a new baby, and we'll go get something to eat. I'm starving. How'd I do? Reed asked. Even though his hands had been freed, he made no move to take the diaper off his face. Did we get the record? It felt like we got the record. I mean, it's all a blur, and while I don't mean to complain, I can't see anything. And I was just wondering if that was a side effect of the altitude, like when you get dizzy when you go skiing in Colorado? Henry gently pulled the diaper off Reed's head. Yeah, Reed, you shattered that record all over the place. Good job, buddy. You were beyond awesome. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen, and you handled the whole thing like a professional stuntman or daredevil. Seems like maybe you were born for adventure. You know, that's exactly what I was thinking. Right after my life flashed before my eyes, and just before everything started smelling like duty. Why does everything smell like duty? Reed looked at their leader. That, Henry said, is the smell of victory. The wonderful smell of victory. All right, you guys know never to try any of these ridiculous things that they're doing in this story. This is fiction, right? That means it's made up, it's fake. Nobody actually did these things. They can't be done safely. Don't do anything you read about or that you hear about in this book. All right, that was the end of chapter 2. So this video is going to stop, and when you're ready, you can start the next one, which will be chapters 3 and 4.